A slide reads, an overview of CHARGE syndrome. Above the words is the logo for the Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project. On the screen is a video of the presenter, a white woman with long brown hair wearing a pink shirt. Below the video of the presenter is the video of the ASL interpreter. The interpreter is a white woman with reddish-brown hair and glasses, wearing a black shirt and a gray sweater. The slides the presenter is speaking about are to the left of the two videos.
Hi, my name is Jen Gettelman, and I am the Deafblind Consultant for the Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, or WDB-TAP for short, and the outreach for the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind. Before stepping into this position, I was a teacher of the deaf in a public school, as well as a residential program for the deaf. I have worked in a variety of classroom settings. Over the course of my time in the classroom, I have worked with several students with CHARGE syndrome, and I continue to learn about CHARGE syndrome with every individual I have had the pleasure of working with. Just to talk a little bit about CHARGE syndrome and what CHARGE syndrome is. So CHARGE syndrome is a genetic syndrome that is pretty rare. It occurs in every 1 in 10,000 births. Because it is rare, you may only ever have one child with CHARGE syndrome the entire time you are teaching. CHARGE syndrome is a complex syndrome. It has a pattern of features. But any individual that has CHARGE doesn't have to have all of the features in order to be diagnosed with CHARGE syndrome. They are truly unique. Two features that many individuals with CHARGE syndrome display are the hidden features of determination and strong character. These individuals continuously work to overcome great obstacles through their lifetime, and they truly are some of the most inspiring kids you'll ever get to work with. Just to look at some of the key features of CHARGE syndrome. There are several different key features of CHARGE syndrome, but it's extremely important to note that every individual with CHARGE does truly have a unique set of features. Every single condition related to CHARGE syndrome has a wide spectrum, ranging all the way from very mild to very profound. I want to take a little bit of time just to briefly share about the different systems that can be affected, just to help build a basic understanding of the complexity of the syndrome and the impact that this combination of features can have on a child with CHARGE, and how that child is learning and how they're functioning, specifically at school. So the first key feature is a coloboma. A coloboma is an incomplete formation of part of the eye, and this can happen in different places. Colobomas can be present in one or both of the eyes, and they can cause anywhere from mild vision loss to complete blindness. And this really depends on how big the coloboma is, where the coloboma is. So again, every child with CHARGE doesn't have to have a coloboma, but if they do, it's going to impact them differently from another child with CHARGE syndrome. The next key feature is cranial nerve abnormalities. These can cause missing or decreased sense of smell. Cranial nerve abnormalities can cause difficulties with swallowing. For some individuals, hearing loss is caused by a cranial nerve abnormality. They can also cause facial palsy on one or both sides of the face. And for some individuals with CHARGE, they can cause vocal cords to be paralyzed. And so if the vocal cords are paralyzed, that individual has to work harder to speak, and often has to push air harder through those vocal cords, which results in that louder sounding speech. So for a student that is impacted with a cranial nerve abnormality that affects their vocal cords, it takes a lot of effort and work for them to talk, and even more effort and work for them to be able to whisper. The next key feature is choanal atresia or stenosis. So the choana are the bony growths behind the nose. These are the passages that go from the back of the nose down into the throat. In many people with CHARD syndrome, one or both of these nasal passages are narrowed or blocked. And if this occurs, that individual may have difficulty with breathing, especially while they're eating or drinking. So if you think of a young child, maybe a baby, who has a cold, they are going to have a difficult time breathing as they're trying to take a bottle. They have to actually stop taking that bottle to take a breath, just because this area is not as developed and they don't know how to do both at the same time when they have a cold. And it's just a example of how this might look for a child with CHARD syndrome when on a normal day-to-day basis. Another key feature is heart defects. About 75 to 80% of children with CHARD syndrome have congenital heart defects. Many individuals with CHARD have multiple complex congenital heart defects, and they may require multiple heart surgeries over the course of their lifetime. Individuals with CHARD also often have characteristic external ears. So the two ears often look different from each other. Usually there is decreased cartilage, so it makes the ear more floppy. The shape and size of the ear may be impacted, but all of this can impact the use of hearing technology, either because the ear is not shaped the same way, or it's not strong enough to hold a hearing aid or other device. Esophageal defects are another key feature. Many individuals with CHARD have abnormal esophagus motility or reflux. And so this can add to difficulties with children having feeding and swallowing issues. It can be painful for kids. Think about a time when you've had reflux. It's uncomfortable and painful. And so it's something that can be painful for these children and may cause them to focus on not feeling well instead of being able to focus on being in your classroom. Another key feature is small or absent semicircular canals. This can cause issues with balance. These balance issues really can be overcome, but especially at a younger age, this might make a child fearful or even unmotivated to move because they're constantly falling or bumping into things. This might make them more prone to bump into people or bump into things. And this really does probably relate to both their compromised vision, but also their balance and their vestibular system. This also impacts them not always having a good understanding of where their body is in space. Sometimes for children with CHARD syndrome, even if they're not having balance issues, when they're learning something new, it's helpful for them to lay on their back. And this is really so that all of their focus can be on learning and not maintaining their body's posture. For kiddos who may not need to lay on their back or for day-to-day work, making sure that the child has a good supportive chair with a back and some armrests where their feet are able to touch the ground easily. Your physical therapist at school or within your district will be a great resource to kind of help look at the seating and make sure that it's as supportive as it needs to be for a child. You may also notice that a child with CHARD syndrome prefers that when they're sitting at a table or a desk, that they're propping their head up. This could be that they're propping their head up on their hands, or even that their arms are down on the desk and they're laying their head down on that desk or that table. This really goes back to that child's vestibular system. Oftentimes, a child with CHARD syndrome's vestibular system is impacted, and it's a lot of work for an individual with CHARD to support their body and to maintain that body posture. So I would really encourage you to allow that child to support their head as needed, whether that is propping it up on a hand or laying down on the table, so that their focus can be on learning and they're not just focused on maintaining their body's posture. Another key feature is that doctors have found that individuals with CHARD syndrome frequently have mutations in a gene on chromosome 8. However, 10 to 20% of individuals with CHARD test negative for this specific gene mutation. So CHARD is really still based on a clinical diagnosis. The child does not have to test positive for the gene mutation. Doctors really use the combination of the key features to diagnose CHARD syndrome. And then lastly, inconsistencies are the most consistent aspect of CHARD. Again, I just want to stress that every individual with CHARD syndrome really does have a unique set of features. If you've worked with one child with CHARD syndrome, you truly have worked with one child with CHARD syndrome. The next child that you encounter or that you work with will likely be very different from the child that you've previously worked with. Next, we're going to just look at some of the areas that can be impacted, and we're going to look at the educational implications for students with CHARD syndrome in these areas. It's really important to look at how the student is functioning in each area, and then work together as a team to determine the types of direct instruction, accommodations, program modifications that can be made to address each of these individual areas that impact the child that you're working with. These kiddos really do take a team approach, and each of you has your own area of expertise. And it's important that others on the team can learn from your area of expertise and build upon your area with the expertise that they have. So the first three areas that can be impacted for kids are vision, hearing, and balance. We've touched on these in the previous slide, so I'm not going to go into depth on any of those. But just remember that those should always kind of be taken into account as you are looking at the different modifications and accommodations you're providing to the student to make sure that the child has access and is able to maintain focus on what they are learning. So the next one is communication. And in this area, the team really needs to look at how the child is able to access information and communication using vision, their hearing, and then oftentimes through touch as well. A lot of times you're going to find that you need to use multiple strategies to be able to ensure that the child with CHARD syndrome has access to both receptive and expressive communication. It's also important to know that the child may use different modes of communication depending on if they're listening or taking in that information receptively, or if they're doing the output of communication expressively. So for example, some of my students in the past have used sign language receptively, but they prefer expressively to use speech for themselves. Sometimes students will use a communication device. Sometimes students will use tactile sign language. So there's a lot of different variety of how children with CHARD syndrome choose to communicate and what is most effective. It's important, though, to make sure that you're involving your teacher of the deaf and your speech and language therapists as you're looking at how the child is communicating, what their preferred mode is, for both that receptive and expressive piece. And additionally, making sure that the teacher of the blind is consulted, especially if vision is being used to access communication, whether that's through pictures or through sign language or through text, but just making sure that access to communication is there and that the appropriate accommodations are being made for the child. Currently, there is a lot of research that's happening looking at the occurrence of behaviors with children who have CHARD syndrome. Some of the areas that they're looking at are emotional regulation, sensory regulation, perseveration, obsessive compulsive behavior. If you want more information on this, two of the leading researchers in the area of behavior and CHARD syndrome are Tim Hartshorn and Casey Stratton. They have articles and websites and different modules that they have created with the research and information that they have done. Additionally, it's important to look at the child from a lens that considers their social emotional well-being, and with that, teaching them those social skills. So children with CHARD syndrome really do need opportunities to be able to connect with peers, to build those friendships and to maintain those friendships. And oftentimes they're needing support in this area. They're needing to learn the skills of being a friend, of having a friend, of what's appropriate within those social relationships. And that's really going to impact their social emotional well-being. Additionally, often these kids really truly benefit from that direct instruction around social skills. It can and probably will take a lot longer for a child with CHARD or a child who's deafblind to generalize that information that's being taught from one situation to another. For example, I worked with a student, and I had the pleasure of working with a student for 3 years. And when I first started with this child, she really needed some work on social skills and how to apply them when she was confronting situations with peers where she felt that it wasn't fair. Something happened and it wasn't fair or it wasn't right. Often it would end with her screaming at a peer, coming into my classroom, very upset, screaming, kind of having an outburst or a meltdown for a while. And we worked every day, obviously when a situation arose, but then there was a dedicated time every single day to start working on these social skills and to really address some of the situations and to teach some strategies of what she could do when there was an issue that arose. And time after time, it kind of played out the same way. And finally, 2.5 years into teaching these social skills, there was a problem that came up, and I said, all right, let's go. I will come help and support you. And she turned to me and said, nope, I got this. I can do this myself. And sure enough, she was able to apply independently those social skills and those strategies that had been taught to her for 2.5 years. Another area that can be impacted and usually is impacted is the area of executive functioning. These skills really do need to be taught in a meaningful, hands-on way to help that individual learn the different executive functioning skills. They need to be repeated and practiced. Executive functioning can include how the individual is able to transition from one activity to another or one space to another space, just organizing themselves, getting ready for the day, doing routines, going through routines, how they're able to use flexible problem solving skills, how they're able to use and access working memory, how they are able to kind of maintain self-control, and so many other areas. So this is really an area that is a lifelong skill. It's going to serve them for the rest of their life. So in my opinion, it is an area that really should be looked at and considered, and then if there is a need, taught skills for. Cognition is another area that can be impacted, but with that said, many individuals with Charge syndrome are in the general education setting. They're functioning within that same range as their peers. It's estimated anywhere between 30 to 50% of individuals with Charge syndrome have normal intelligence. And it's really important to not underestimate a child with Charge. This can happen, and oftentimes happens, because of that combined vision and hearing loss, along with those balance issues. Sometimes they're seen as being lazy or not understanding, but really these children are much more capable than they are often given credit for. So holding them accountable is going to do them a lot for their future. Making sure that they have the right accommodations and supports in place to ensure that they have access to that information that they may be missing because of their hearing or vision. Making sure that they are well supported as they're learning, so that they're not having to focus on keeping their balance or their body posture. Really, all of these will help to allow that child to work to his or her potential. You will see that with that right support in place, your student can thrive and continue to make gains both academically and socially. Additionally, transition skills can be worked on. Often, transition skills are taught through watching and listening to others, through that incidental learning, or sometimes through that secondary learning, which both of these can prove to be challenging for young adults with Charge and with that combined vision and hearing loss. They might not have access visually or auditorily to learn those skills incidentally. So the more you can teach those transition skills in a direct, hands-on, purposeful manner, the more they're going to be able to access those and use those. And really, those transition skills, if possible, should begin to be taught at an earlier age because of that lack of incidental learning, and that lack of access to that incidental learning, as well as that need for hands-on real-world experiences. Often those take a little bit longer to provide. On this slide, there's just a list of resources. There's my contact information, there's the Deafblind Project, there's some different Charge resources for you to explore if you want to learn a little bit more. But always, if you have any questions or you need support or you need a consultation, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Resources: Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, http://wesp-dh.wI.gov/wdbtap/. Jen Gettelman, JENNIFER.GETTELMAN at wesp-dh.wi.gov or 262-749-6601. To request a consultation from WDBTAP, https://wesp-deshp.wi.gov/wdbtap/request services/ Charge Syndrome Foundation, https://www.chargesyndrome.org/professionals/educators/ Charge Syndrome Learning Modules, https://charge-syndrome.com/ Living with Charge video from the perspective of a young adult, https://youtu.be/WC P R V H D 84G. Displayed on the screen are the logos for WDB TAP and Ideas That Work. Below the logos it reads Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, WDB TAP. The contents of this presentation were developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, H326T230035. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.